The wooden legs of my chair screamed against the marble floor half a second before my spine hit empty air, and then 200 wedding guests went completely silent as I crashed to the ground with a shattered water goblet spraying glass across my palm. Standing above me, my hands still tingling from the fall, was my sister Delphine in her ivory gown, gripping the chair she just yanked out from under me. "You don't belong at the family table," she hissed. Beside her, our father Walter sat in his wheelchair and struck his good hand against the metal armrest 3 sharp times. Across the room, her new husband Julian rose from his seat, face pale under the chandeliers. "That's enough," he said. "Do you want me to tell everyone the truth?" Delphine froze, because the truth had been 6 weeks in the making, and it started in a speech therapy waiting room that smelled like stale coffee. I was 39, running operations at a rehabilitation hospital, and every Tuesday I wheeled my father to his appointments while my mother Helene made excuses for why Delphine, 20 minutes late as usual, deserved patience, and I deserved none. That evening, going through Dad's care log at my kitchen table, I noticed something odd. A reimbursement check issued to Delphine for bathroom accessibility equipment I had already paid for myself, invoice in hand. Below it sat a strange $4,000 charge under a merchant code that didn't match anything medical. I photographed the statement, filed it in the binder I'd started keeping since Dad's stroke, and drove to my parents' house to ask my sister directly. She folded her arms and said Dad knew she was just organizing things. My mother accused me of trying to control the family, as always. But my father, watching from his wheelchair, raised his hand and knocked 3 times against the side table. In his therapy shorthand, 3 knocks meant no. That night in my own apartment, the one I'd quietly rented 3 months earlier with my own salary, I looked up the merchant code. It didn't belong to a pharmacy or a contractor. It belonged to the Windermere Grand Hotel. My father hadn't built anything. He'd been billed for his daughter's wedding venue. I emailed Delphine calmly asking for invoices tied to 3 specific withdrawals, and she called within minutes furious demanding to know why I was auditing her. The next morning, she preempted me by blasting the family group chat with a cropped screenshot of a transfer, the exact amount I'd personally advanced for Dad's wheelchair ramp, framing it as proof I was the real thief. My mother demanded an apology. I said nothing, just attached the itemized receipt and Dad's signed authorization for my reimbursement. The chat went quiet, but the war had only started. Days later, I arrived at my parents' house to drop off a prescription and found my access code no longer worked. A message from Delphine popped up on my phone. She'd stripped my caregiver app permissions to protect Dad from financial pressure, and the family had decided I shouldn't come by anymore. I didn't pound on the door. I screenshotted the lockout, called my father's room phone, and told him lightly I'd see him at therapy later in the week. He tapped the receiver twice, acknowledgement. That night, I signed the acceptance letter for the full-time management promotion I delayed for years to care for him, locked down my finances, moved my emergency fund to a new bank, and started sketching a business plan for a consulting service to help families navigate stroke recovery logistics. I was quietly building an entirely independent life, and nobody in my family knew it existed. The following week, I brought my evidence binder to Bianca Fontaine, an elder law attorney with a calm, expensive-looking office downtown. She asked if my goal was control of my father's accounts or protection of my father, period. I told her the truth. I didn't want a cent of his money because taking control would only validate Delphine's narrative that I was the greedy sister. Bianca pulled his actual power of attorney from the county database, strictly limited to medical and living expenses, no gifting authority, mandatory record keeping. Delphine had already violated it by refusing an accounting. Bianca laid the bathroom invoice next to the mysterious hotel charge and circled both amounts in red. They matched exactly. Spreading 18 months of statements across her desk, we found the pattern. Small test withdrawals over a year ago, then a sudden spike 8 months back, right when Delphine posted her engagement ring online. Bianca fired off preservation notices to the bank, the hotel, and every vendor. Within days, a wedding planner's forwarded email proved my sister had personally instructed vendors to use vague billing descriptions. She wasn't confused about boundaries. She was building a disguise. My father's speech therapist, Renata, asked me to sit in on his session that Thursday. He was sharp, verifying dates, addresses, his birth. Trapped only by a stroke that stole his ability to speak in full sentences, not his mind. When Renata mentioned Delphine's wedding, he slammed his fist down 3 times, then used his communication tablet to select 2 words, private meeting. Renata told me quietly that he'd been trying to say the same thing for 3 weeks. 2 weeks before the ceremony, while Delphine was at her final dress fitting, I arranged for a private evaluation. Bianca, an independent psychiatrist, and a notary met my father in a conference room. He confirmed through his tablet that he'd never agreed to a venue, address, or credit card payoffs, only nursing invoices. He also remembered giving Delphine a text authorization code, believing it was for his wheelchair ramp. In reality, it had made her an approved payee on his checking account. He signed a full revocation of her power of attorney, his hand shaking, but the signature deliberate. My mother left a furious voicemail that evening, admitting on tape that she knew about the missing funds and that Delphine planned to pay it back with her inheritance. An admission that they'd been treating a living man as though his estate were already up for division. 4 days before the wedding, a bank fraud investigator called. 3 weeks earlier, Delphine had scheduled a $28,000 transfer to the Windermere Grand, timed to the final venue deadline, and our legal freeze had intercepted it before it cleared. Delphine called minutes later, sickly sweet at first, then panicked, demanding I recant to fraud investigators and claim the money was an early inheritance. I told her she had no legal authority left and hung up. Bianca sent a formal settlement demand. Full accounting, returned funds, restored access to our father. Deadline Friday before the rehearsal dinner. Delphine responded by texting me that I was a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin her happiness. My mother offered a conditional truce. I could attend the wedding because the photographer needed a full family portrait, and Dad refused to wear his tuxedo unless I was there, but warned me to keep my mouth shut and seated me near the kitchen doors. I nearly declined until my Aunt Josephine sent a photo of my father's tablet reading, "Please come sit with me." That settled it. I locked my binder in Bianca's filing cabinet, arranged my own transportation, brought no gift, and dropped my apartment key into my clutch as a reminder I had somewhere safe to return to. The morning of the wedding, Julian called, tense, asking why our father's name was tangled in a billing dispute. I told him to ask his bride. He texted me a screenshot from the hotel's vendor portal, a massive balance due, a declined transaction, and Walter's name as account holder. "Delphine says your father gave us the money," he wrote. The hotel says the payment was returned. Inside the Windermere Grand, chandeliers glittered over roses that represented physical therapy sessions my father would never get. My mother grabbed my wrist mid-reception, hissing at me to stay silent. Julian kept refreshing his phone near the stage, jaw tight. When I confronted him quietly, he admitted Delphine swore the money was a gift. I told him then she'd have no reason to stop our father from confirming it himself. At the seating chart, I found my name banished to the overflow table by the kitchen doors. But across the room, my father slammed his armrest 3 times, and Aunt Josephine flagged down a staff member to bring a chair to the head table instead. Delphine intercepted me before I could sit, ordering me back to the corner, accusing me of trying to steal her spotlight. I told her calmly that Dad could answer for himself and reached for the chair just as she yanked it away. That was the fall, the crack of wood against marble, the goblet shattering, the silence of 200 guests, dozens of phones already raised for the bridal toasts now capturing everything instead. My father hammered his fist in that same unmistakable rhythm. "No, no, no," while Julian overturned his own chair standing up, declaring that was enough and asking his bride if she wanted him to tell everyone the truth. Security intercepted Delphine when she lunged for our father's tablet. Aunt Josephine placed it safely in his lap. Julian, voice stripped of its usual bravado, asked Walter directly if he'd agreed to pay for the wedding. 3 knocks, then through the device, no. Delphine spun on me, screaming that I'd trained a brain-damaged man like a circus animal, but I never once touched the tablet, and my father kept typing, "I understand." Delphine used my money, while Aunt Josephine confirmed to the stunned crowd that he understood every word. Cornered, Delphine finally cracked, shrieking that the estate money would have been hers eventually anyway. Julian looked at his bride with open disgust, told the room the reception was over, and walked out without looking back. At urgent care, getting glass picked from my palm, IG. Odd a text from Bianca. The bank had found an external account under Delphine's name. The wedding was only part of it. The forensic accounting, finished weeks later, revealed roughly $120,000 stolen over 18 months, funneled into credit card payoffs, vacations, and clothes, with my sister deliberately mislabeling transfers as caregiver reimbursements to me. A frame job, the login records, and my hospital time cards demolished instantly, since the transfers came from her IP address during hours I was clocked in at work. She'd even tried logging in 3 times the night of the wedding to force the payment through. Cut off from money, she posted a tearful social media statement blaming me. Instead, wedding guests posted their own raw footage of the chair, the tablet grab, her confession, and it spread fast. My mother showed up at my building admitting she'd known a small portion of the truth and rationalized it as an early inheritance. I told her dad was still alive and still needed that money to survive. The district attorney eventually charged Delphine with felony embezzlement, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and battery. Julian filed for divorce before spring, mailing me every email exchange he'd had with hotel billing, along with a short apologetic note admitting he'd ignored the warning signs because he wanted a beautiful wedding. Delphine swore she'd fight the charges until the DA presented an overwhelming case, and she took a plea. Restitution that forced her to sell her car and drain her savings, surrender the refunded vendor deposits, and permanently forfeit any right to manage another person's finances. At sentencing, she cornered me in the hallway begging me to tell the judge dad had always meant to give her the money. I reminded her she'd had 6 weeks to come clean before she chose to pull a chair out from under me in front of 200 people. In court, I read a statement built entirely from words my father had chosen himself about the indignity of being silenced. And when I finished, his tablet spoke one line into the courtroom. Rachel told the truth, except in this telling my name, Simone told the truth. Delphine 3 years, 18 months active, the rest suspended with mandatory restitution. My mother tried one last time on the courthouse steps, demanding I pay legal fees and write a forgiveness letter to the parole board. I told her forgiveness didn't require erasing consequences or funding a disaster I hadn't caused and walked away. Months later, I accepted my promotion to operations manager, and my side business, Anchor Point Consulting, took its first real client, a family untangling a medical trust for a relative who'd lost her ability to speak. My father lives now in an assisted living apartment with wide windows and ferns we picked out together, choosing his own meals and schedule through his tablet. Small acts of ordinary autonomy that once felt impossible. My mother visits on Tuesdays with magazines and gossip, no longer holding any legal power over his life. And one quiet evening, sharing a meal at the second-hand table I'd built myself, with Aunt Josephine pouring water and my father spelling out 3 words on a screen, "This is family." My business phone rang. A stranger crying saying her brother had just accused her of stealing from their father's care fund. I didn't offer empty comfort. I pulled out a blank folder and told her to take a breath and tell me what records she already had, because sometimes the hardest lesson is that being the strong one doesn't mean disappearing into everyone else's lies. It means documenting the truth until it can't be denied. Take a moment to comment your city or country. I love connecting with you all. Thank you for listening and supporting, and be sure to subscribe for more stories. More are coming your way soon. Until next time, stay kind to yourself and stay strong.